Hello and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we've been following for you today. The Labor Department released the latest unemployment data today. The Biden administration praises the low unemployment rate and job growth as a sign the economy is doing well. But is there more to the picture? Tensions escalate after a Russian warship sinks. U.S. officials say the Russian-Ukraine war could last through the end of this year. CIA Director William Burns said that China is Russia's silent partner in its aggression against Ukraine. The communist regime is also the biggest challenge the CIA has ever faced, and we'll tell you why. In recent weeks, America's reliance on adversaries for oil and gas has come to the forefront. But are critical rare earth minerals crucial to our way of life also under siege by America's adversaries? We'll take a look. The Labor Department's latest report shows unemployment falling in nearly every state, and more jobs are being added each month. The Biden administration points to these numbers as an indication of a strong economy. But how does surging inflation factor into the equation? NTD's Melina Wisecup reports.
The U.S. Labor Department released a state-by-state report today revealing that unemployment has dropped in 37 states, hitting record lows in 12 states. Facing mounting pressure to get the soaring prices under control, the Biden administration is holding on to this piece of good economic news.
7.9 million jobs over the course of my presidency. Unemployment at 3.6%.
Are these factors an indication that that the economy is doing well, or are there other factors that we should be looking at to assess the state of the economy?
Well, I think overall the economy is doing pretty well right now. The low unemployment rate is an indication, but really, if you look at the job growth, we're not up to where we were before the pandemic, and a big indicator that we haven't fully recovered is if you look at the labor force participation rate. I mean, so far we've talked about unemployment and labor force participation, but you really have to look at the inflation rate at the same time. We've been propping up the economy with government spending that's added to inflation, so it might be good if we could move to try to balance the budget.
And to pay off some of our national debt and to fund new investments that Biden says are meant to support economic growth, the Biden administration is pushing a wealth tax. And while it would only hit the wealthiest Americans initially, it could open the door for taxing lower income folks down the road. This trend was shown in the past.
So what that means is $100 million next year isn't going to be as much money as $100 million this year. It sounds like a lot of money right now, but you go back and think about the way inflation works. If that $100 million doesn't change, a lot of people are going to be subject to that wealth tax in the future. But if we look at the history of the income tax, there's a pretty good chance that once a wealth tax is installed, we'll start asking the question, well, if people who have net worth of $100 million should pay the tax, why not people with $50 million? Why not people with $20 million? And pretty soon, just for fairness, everybody will be subject to the tax like they are with the income tax. So I think the big threat to the middle class isn't what Biden has explicitly proposed today, is the potential for this tax to spread in the future.
Melina, how likely is it that this proposed wealth tax will and can be a reality? Is Congress able to pass this in the near future, do you think?
Steve, Biden originally proposed this wealth tax as part of his Build Back Better bill, which we know is now stalled in Congress. But theoretically, Democrats right now could pass this rather easily with only 50 votes through something called a budget reconciliation process. The question is if all 50 Democrat senators would be on board with this. As we know, in the past, we saw hesitancy and concerns from Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. So while the White House and congressional leadership is trying to revive this Build Back Better bill and revive this proposed wealth tax, it's unclear if it would have enough support from Congress to pass it. Steve, back to you.
Melina Wisecup reporting. Tensions continue in Kyiv after a Russian warship sinks in the Black Sea. The U.S. believes the Russian-Ukraine war could last until the end of this year, while Russia warns the U.S. to stop sending arms to Ukraine. The Russian missile cruiser Moskva now rests at the bottom of the Black Sea. It was one of Russia's most vital warships. Russia insists a fire led to the sinking, but Ukraine claims to have hit the ship with 2 missiles. The U.S. today agreed with Ukraine's account. Meanwhile, Russian forces are rapidly building their presence in eastern Ukraine. Ukraine President Vladimir Zelensky says he expects Russia to increase military action, including the possibility of using nuclear weapons.
When they begin to speak about one or another battles or involve enemies or nuclear weapons or some chemical, issues, chemical weapons, they should do it. They could do it. So they can.
And Russia this week has formally protested the U.S. arming Ukraine. That came after the Biden administration announced an additional $800 million in military aid to Ukraine. And there may not be a short-term end to this conflict. CNN reports that Secretary of State Antony Blinken told European allies that the war could last through the end of 2022. On Thursday, CIA Director William Burns called China Russia's silent partner as he made references to Putin's attack on Ukraine during a speech at Georgia Tech.
A silent partner in Putin's aggression, Xi Jinping's China is our greatest challenge, in many ways the most profound test that CIA has ever faced.
He said, "We have never had an adversary with more reach in domains ranging from military, economic, space, and cyberspace than we currently have with a very ambitious China."
The People's Republic of China is intent upon building the capabilities to bully its neighbors, replace the United States as the preeminent power in the Indo-Pacific, and chip away with other authoritarians at the rules-based international order that we and our allies have worked so hard to sustain.
He said that the problem with China's rise is that the communist nation has used its capabilities against the U.S. and its own people.
In the last few years, Beijing has hacked at least 150 U.S. companies to steal secrets. It is trying to increase its nuclear arsenal to 1,000 warheads. It has detained 1 million of its own citizens simply because they are Muslim, and arrested thousands more in Hong Kong for peacefully supporting democracy.
Director Burns said his concerns were about the communist regime, not the Chinese people.
It's important to be clear that our concern is about the threat posed by the People's Republic of China, the PRC, not about the people of China, let alone fellow Americans of Chinese or Asian descent.
Burns said that the CIA is establishing a new mission center to focus on China and will double the number of Chinese speakers and officers abroad in a similar fashion to what was done with Soviet specialists during the Cold War. When we think of America's natural resources, we often think of oil and gas, but not necessarily the critical rare earth minerals that are used in a wide variety of applications, many of which are vital to our way of life, being used in products from semiconductors to electric vehicles. China has been focused on creating a monopoly on such minerals both in the U.S. and inside of mineral-rich Africa. And as a result, the U.S. is now heavily dependent on foreign countries for many of these natural resources. We sat down with Eric Fitzsimmons, former Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy during the Trump administration. Here's a look. Alex Fitzsimmons, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Hi, Steve. Thank you for having me.
Alex, I just want to ask you, during the Trump administration, what do you think were some of the key policies that were able to keep the cost of energy, specifically gasoline, down?
Yeah. It's a great question, Steve. The Trump administration focused on a pro-growth, all-of-the-above strategy to make sure that we're maximizing the resources that we have here in the United States. The United States is now the #1 producer of oil and natural gas in the world, something that nobody thought was possible 10 years ago, and we're exporting our liquefied natural gas to more than 37 countries around the world. That didn't just happen by accident. It happened because we invested in more innovation. We invested in streamlined permitting processes to encourage producers in the United States to drill more at home so we don't have to rely on foreign adversaries.
Now, Alex, the Democrats say that now is the time to make a hard transition to renewable energy. Is it as simple as that, or is it a situation where it's trying to fit a square peg into a round hole?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that most of us have the same shared goals in terms of we want an affordable, reliable, and clean energy system, right? And we want to produce that energy here at home in the United States, which means that we need to be focused on a broad portfolio of clean energy technologies, everything from fossil fuel power plants with carbon capture, natural gas, advanced nuclear power, clean hydrogen, and of course, wind and solar and energy storage as well. But that's why if we're going to have the most affordable, reliable, clean, and secure energy system as possible, we need to be investing in a broad portfolio of technologies. And the United States has demonstrated that we can do that. We don't have to choose between protecting the environment and having a clean energy system that's low cost and that works for everyone. We've shown that we can do both. The U.S. is the #1 reducer of CO2 emissions in the world. And of course, there's a lot more we can do, and the only way we can do more is by investing in a broad range of clean energy technologies.
So when we talk about natural resources, I think natural gas, oil tends to, take up a lion's share of the conversation. But there's also rare earth minerals. The United States has a lot of these minerals. How important is it to our national security, do you think, to be extracting these?
It's important to recognize that critical minerals are vital to modern society. I mean, they are in our smartphones, our laptops, our clean energy technologies, and they're also used for a variety of national security purposes. But unfortunately, our critical mineral supply chains are largely controlled by foreign adversaries, including the Chinese and Russian governments. The U.S. is import reliant on 30 of 35 critical minerals, and we have zero production capacity for 14 of those minerals. We have to do something about this if we are going to have a secure and reliable energy system that also promotes our national security, because energy security is national security. And so we need to be investing in all parts of the supply chain, both the upstream processing and the midstream separations and processing capabilities, which is something that we focused on a lot when I was working on critical minerals in the Trump administration.
You mentioned our adversaries having a hold on these minerals, China and Russia. Specifically, you hear about China in their operations in Africa, also here in the United States. How concerning is this?
It's a serious concern, and we see the results of this playing out on the world stage today. I mean, most of the world's cobalt, for example, which is a critical mineral, comes from the Congo. And China has been buying up mines in the Congo for years. And even if China does not control the mining process, they control the midstream separations and processing capability for cobalt and for most critical minerals, which means that even if we were to invest in mining abroad, and I think we should, if we don't also develop and invest in a domestic processing capability, then we're just moving the supply chain vulnerability somewhere else. It's why it's important to have a total supply chain strategy if we are truly going to have a domestic and secure supply chain for critical minerals in the U.S.
Alex Fitzsimmons, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Chris Magnus, head of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, said that Texas Governor Abbott is not properly coordinating with the federal government when he buses illegal immigrants to Washington, D.C. A third bus of illegal aliens arrived from Texas to Washington, D.C. on Friday. Commissioner Magnus's statement said there was shared interest in an orderly and humane immigration process. On Wednesday, immigrants told NTD staff that a charitable organization was providing food and bus tickets to their final destinations. Governor Abbott is shipping illegal immigrants to the Capitol as a way to protest President Biden's plan to terminate Title 42, a public health policy that made it easier to expel illegal immigrants at the border. According to the Department of Homeland Security, close to 800,000 people illegally crossed the southwest border and were released into the United States since January 2021. That number does not include hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants that have simply gotten away. President Biden is nominating the next Federal Reserve's Vice Chairman of Supervision. The nominee is a former Department of Treasury official under the Obama administration. Michael Barr served as the head of the Office of Financial Institutions at the U.S. Treasury between 2009 and 2010. He's currently the dean of the University of Michigan School of Public Policy. Biden says that Barr has spent his career protecting consumers and brings the expertise and experience needed for the economy and families across the country. Barr's nomination will now face scrutiny on the Republican side of the Senate and from moderate Democrats. Biden's previous nominee, Sarah Bloom Raskin, withdrew because Democratic Senator Joe Manchin did not support her nomination. It was due to her stance, largely in part, on American energy production. Twitter is trying to block Elon Musk's takeover, while former President Trump says he's unlikely to tweet again, even if Musk buys the platform. What is the so-called poison pill that the Twitter board may use to block Elon Musk from buying the company? And have they taken that action yet? We have the latest. The Republican National Committee votes to leave the Commission on Presidential Debates. The RNC is saying that the commission is partisan and biased. Hello and welcome back to NTD's Capital Report. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Former President Trump says he's unlikely to return to Twitter even if Elon Musk buys the platform and reinstates his account. Trump made the remarks in an interview on Thursday.
We're doing a big platform right now, so probably wouldn't have any interest. You know, Twitter's become very boring. They've gotten rid of a lot of their good voices on Twitter, a lot of their conservative voices.
This comes hours after Musk offered to buy Twitter for about $43 billion. Musk says he plans to transform Twitter into a bastion of free speech. Twitter is trying to block Musk's takeover attempt with what is known as a poison pill, meaning certain shareholders can purchase more stock if Musk attempts to seize control. Elon Musk has been making headlines in what is being described as an attempt of a hostile takeover of Twitter. Today, Twitter's board is taking measures to keep Musk at bay. Here with us to discuss is President of Convention of States, Mark Meckler. Mark Meckler, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report again.
Always good to be with you.
Mark, it's been announced that Twitter's board of directors has enacted the so-called poison pill plan to try to prevent Musk from taking over the company. What does this mean exactly, and do you think it will be effective?
Yeah, it's a really interesting maneuver by Twitter, and what it allows is if any shareholder reaches 15% or more of ownership by buying shares on the open market, and Musk is currently at about 9.3%, then it would allow other shareholders to buy shares at a diluted price, at a lower price. And that's intended to dilute his ownership share in the company. You know, whether it works or not, it depends on whether people take advantage of that. And also, I think there's a possibility of Musk litigating against the company for doing things that aren't in the best interest of the shareholders. So we'll have to see how this plays out.
With regard to what Musk is doing, the so-called hostile takeover, is this type of strategy unprecedented, or does this type of thing happen, just not as high profile, with a social media company ironically at the center of this deal?
Yeah, certainly this stuff happens all the time, and there are sometimes even high profile, large scale buyouts like this, hostile takeovers, hostile buyouts, generally done when an investor, a group of investors, believe that a company is not operating at peak efficiency or not operating effectively for the benefit of shareholders. We've just never seen it at this scale, especially with a social media company.
Mark, how significant would it be if you were able to do this? And what do you think it would mean for the future of big tech? And do you think there are greater implications?
Well, I think it's incredibly significant. If he can do it, he'll take the company private. He'll turn the company into a true free speech platform. And I think that has ramifications not only in the United States, but the world over. I think it would be good for rule of law countries, good for the free flow of information, good for America for sure. So I think that's pretty significant. I think the broader ramifications are it demonstrates that Elon Musk at this point is so wealthy that he can come in and essentially threaten virtually any company. Could do the same thing to Disney or companies like that, come in and buy up a significant share portion. And he's also demonstrated that it's not about the economics of the transaction to him, it's about the principle. When you have as much money as Elon Musk does, last I saw it was about $243 billion, spending $43 billion, it doesn't affect his lifestyle, it doesn't affect his finances at all.
Mark, any thoughts on what former President Trump might be thinking right now? He just started his own platform because he was deplatformed. I'm sure he's sunk a lot of money into that already. Where do you think Trump stands on all of this?
Yeah, in my opinion, Trump stands in deep trouble. I mean, what I've seen of the platform, it's not performing well. They can't put people on it. They have trouble with their technology. As somebody who was the former CEO of Parler, I can tell you, I'm not comfortable with the technology they're using or the way the platform's structured. So I'm guessing right now, President Trump is very unhappy with his team for not being able to take advantage of this moment.
Before I let you go, Mark, there's an argument that I've been hearing that billionaires should not be meddling in politics. Zuckerberg spent $500 million on election-related causes. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, what I would say is really what you should hear them saying is billionaires who do not toe the wokest line of the radical progressive left should not be meddling in politics. That's what they mean. I think it's a good thing that Musk is doing this, and I think many more who are libertarian or on the right should do the same.
Mark Meckler, thank you.
Thank you.
The Republican National Committee voted unanimously yesterday to withdraw from the Commission on Presidential Debates. The commission governs the general election debates. The vote comes after the GOP urged candidates not to participate in televised debates unless the commission adopts major reforms. RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel says the commission is refusing to enact simple and common sense reforms. She's asking for changes, including hosting debates before voting begins and selecting moderators who have never worked for the candidates in the debate. McDaniel says the GOP is going to find other better debate platforms than the commission, and she's calling the commission biased and prone to partisanship. A longtime donor to prominent Democrats has been sentenced to 30 years in prison. 67-year-old Edward Buck was found guilty of 9 felony counts involving the overdose deaths of 2 men. Buck was a longtime donor to the top Democratic candidates, including Hillary Clinton during her 2016 presidential campaign. The judge ruling on the case was appointed by Clinton's husband, former President Bill Clinton. Court papers said that for years through 2019, Buck engaged in what authorities called a pattern of party and play. The businessman would solicit men, including the homeless and those struggling with drug addiction, to consume drugs he provided. In some cases, Buck injected the victims with the drugs. Buck's lawyers argued that Buck himself had been a victim of sexual abuse and that he should be given the opportunity to rehabilitate and obtain treatment for the underlying issues. The doors at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue are reopening to the public starting today, and ticket holders will be able to tour the White House. Public tours were put on hold in early 2020 due to the CCP virus. According to the White House statement, the situation will be monitored closely based on recommendations from the CDC and other health officials. Anyone who tests positive for the CCP virus or has related symptoms within the last 10 days is being advised to stay home. And the White House will host the annual Easter egg roll on Easter Monday. President Biden and the First Lady are expected to welcome some 30,000 people from across the country. This includes thousands of military families. That's all we have for you this evening on the Capitol Report. Don't forget to visit ntd.com/Capitol Report to watch and share with your friends. For now, I'm Steve Lance. Thanks for watching and have a very happy Easter.